John Hipwell of Hips Productions is my guest today. John's career started in that halcyon period of the renaissance of the Australian film industry. And in fact, his first film out of film school was Alvin Purple. So John's been around for a long time and he's managed to do what very few people do. He's created a career over a long period. So I'm excited to talk to him today about how he's managed to do that. Thank you, John, for coming along today to Tete-a-Tete.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Leslie, and a real honour. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I, of course, have to start with how you got going in your early career.
I fell in love with television as a kid. Television arrived in Warrandyte when I grew up at the local milk bar. That was the big, you know, it was the thing to do in the town of Warrandyte to get more business in competition with all the other shops around. And so I used to come home from primary school and pick up the loaf of bread for the lunches the next day. And I fell in love with Video Village and certain television programs, and I used to sit there on the stool, you know, watching, just glued to the television.
And you found your way to Swinburne.
Later on, they used to shoot Matlock Police in Warrandyte, and I observed them making film. One particular time, I had a discussion with with a person that was a film crew, saying that I thought that the gun was in the wrong place on the and they you're right, yes, you're right, the gun. So they fixed the. And so I became this sort of young man who was interested in film, and that became very friendly. And so then it became clear that I should go to Swinburne Film and Television School and do film and television. It was also a rebellion against my mum and dad, who said that I was going to be a square eyes and that I shouldn't. I watched too much television, you know, as growing up.
You can never watch too much television.
Never.
So what did you learn at Swinburne that you were then able to take out into the real world?
Well, the big takeaway at Swinburne was, well, there were two big takeaways at Swinburne. One was that I was a crazy person just like everybody else. So for the first time I found...
You found your tribe.
I found my tribe, I did, yeah, it was fantastic. And the other was I went from an idea to showing my film with an audience. That practical process of having an idea about making a film and then going through the pre-production, the script development and pre-production and production, the shoot, post-production, and then exhibition was a really valuable experience. So when I became professional and joined the film industry, I knew why there was a slate and why the stills photographer and why the makeup and all these different jobs, what they're all about.
And so you did a placement while you were at Swinburne on a film?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, while I was at Swinburne, Tim Burstall from Hexagon Films was searching for some work experience people, and so he got in contact with Swinburne, which was the only film and television school then at the time, and I was a bit of a rebel at that time. Will always have been in a way, and so the lecturers suggested that I apply for the job and get me out of the school and get me onto a real film set, and so that's what I did, and I got the job, and I was a runner, and I found a mature tribe that all took me under their wing, and they were all the cream of the industry at the time.
Yes. So you said you were a runner. What does that mean?
I was a disposable person that could leave the set, you know, makeup, wardrobe, camera, they were all indispensable on the film set, but I was the one person that could leave and go off and sort out the problems outside of the set and then bring it to the set to resolve problems. And in fact, on Alvin Purple, there's one particular prop in the film that they suddenly realised they didn't have. Had a beat up old FJ Holden back then, and I rushed off and got the prop and brought it back. And
from there you went on to work on a couple of other quite remarkable films.
I was very fortunate, so I was promoted on Alvin Purple to third assistant director.
Okay.
So then I was headhunted by Crawford Productions. They were looking for assistant directors, so I joined, and there was a number of people on Alvin Purple that were, so they recommended that I get a job. So I joined Crawford Productions, and then after that I did Eliza Fraser and Getting a Wisdom and Mango Tree and Mad Max and I continue to do a lot of work backwards and forwards between feature films and independent freelance work as well.
Right. So you were working at that stage as a third AD?
Well, I kept working my way up. So
before you tell me that, what does a third do? And let's work our way through. What does a third do? What does a second do? And so on.
The assistant director's department is just that. They assist the director, and that's the production department. That's the management department of a film set, and it's hierarchical. So the runner is the shit kicker, and then you've got the third assistant director, and second and first. And the first assistant director, if I go for the top, the first assistant director manages the whole shoot. They work directly with the director and the director of photography to make sure that everything's running smoothly. And underneath that first assistant director is the second and the third. And the second is really basically the liaison between the production office and the film set. And then the third assistant director is usually the person that manages all the extras and the cast and the makeup and the wardrobe, the liaison between the first assistant director and the outer set, as it were. So the first assistant director is absolutely pivotal in the hub of the shoot, and the third assistant director is really managing, is communicating between the first assistant director and the makeup, wardrobe department and the extras and the organising the traffic control and organising all sorts of odds and ends, and yeah.
So this is the management side,
correct,
of running a production.
That's correct.
Which frees up the DOP, the director,
yeah,
to just concentrate on what's happening in front of the camera.
That's correct.
So the first AD back is really managing everything else behind the scenes.
There's two sides of the business. There's a producer and there's a director. And the producer is the organisational person and the director is a creative person. And the producer is there to make sure that everything the director wants and the producer can afford and can schedule must be there for the director to use to his or her expertise. And so first assistant director is underneath the producer. They're making sure that the budget and the schedule are kept and organised, and everything that the producer has agreed to allow the director to have is there and available for them to use. So as a third assistant director or as a runner, that they're down the sort of the ranks. The word goes out that someone's forgotten something and it's been agreed to in the schedule and the script and the budget and everything, so that person goes out and organises it and makes sure it happens. So yeah.
What drew you to that side of the business?
Father was an architect, and so in many respects an architect is a producer of a house, yeah, and I saw the process. I see my job as very similar. I work with a lot of people to produce something that is to entertain and educate people.
So it's a project management role, and in some cases the projects are 5 years long, the feature film or more.
Yes, that's correct.
And in some cases the projects are quite short if you're doing a corporate or something,
yep,
a short film or whatever.
Yep,
so
yep.
so it's basically the same process, but sometimes truncated and sometimes quite long and complex.
There's three keys. There's the script, and then the budget and the schedule. So out of the script we get a budget and a schedule, and that was similar to my father. My father was usually given a budget. So I learnt from him that was an interesting process, but of course television was the new age. But I was able to take a lot of the skills that I'd sort of observed from my father into that business of managing.
One of the things that I know that you've done over your years is help people to get finance for projects. Can you take me through the process? And I'm sure there isn't a standard one, but can you take me through a typical process for getting finance right from the very beginning of a project?
Let's take the example of a feature film.
Yeah.
So a feature film in today's production process, and in Australia, because it's very different around the world, you need to first develop the script and you work with a script writer. There are funding bodies like Screen Australia, and that's a federal funding body, and then you have state funding bodies. So in Melbourne we have Film Victoria, or there's other funding bodies in other states, and so every project's different and every story is different, and every team is different. So in a very simplified, truncated case, you connect with a writer, that's it, as a producer. I'm talking from a producer's point of view, or the writer comes to you and says, look, I've got this fantastic story that I want to tell, and if you agree with that person and you're able to establish a good relationship with that person because you've got to work with them through hell and high water, then you enter into an agreement, and then you seek development funding, development funding is to pay the writer the award rates to write the script, a first and a second and a third draft. And then once you've done that, then you can seek production funding through independent finance and through government agency finance as well. And through, of course, television networks, pre-sales through the television networks. It depends on whether it's a theatrical feature film or a television project.
And of course, as we know, the industry is changing incredibly fast, and the rise of the direct streaming has really turned the industry on its head, hasn't it?
Well, I think that the film industry, particularly at this time, is very disruptive, and in fact Netflix is a disruptive, and we're supporting Netflix in delivering content to Netflix.
And how do you think that impacts on independent producers like you?
Everybody carries a screen now with them. When I was a boy, there was one screen in Warrandyte. That was the only screen. Then there was theatre, and I used to attend theatre with my parents, which was lovely. Now everybody's got a screen. So therefore my understanding is that there's a greater need for content. There's a great deal more content out there in the business. I don't see it as a negative thing. I see it as a positive evolution of the industry that I've been in. It's just as competitive, just as difficult, just as complex.
So what advice would you give to young people who are starting out in production now, given the disruption that's going on in the industry?
I believe the best advice to give to anybody who wants to get into the film and television industry and media industry is to make films. It's all very well going to the movies and watching the movies and talking about it and getting excited and saying, I want to do that. That's all well and good, but if you don't make films, then you don't experience the process and you don't learn. And you keep building that reputation. So you make a small film, make 1 minute film, just go out and shoot it. There's the dog, shoot the dog, and tell a story. The story has a beginning, a middle and an end. And then show it to people, because audience is what you're there for. Your audience is the key. And then make another film and see if you can do better. And then keep making it better and better. And eventually, people will get very excited about what you're doing, and they'll start to ask you, when's your next film being made, or what are you doing now, or what's and you'll find collaborators as well. You'll attract people that actually like what you're doing and want to work with you.
Yeah. Now you've mentioned Mad Max a couple of times. I must ask you, what role has that film played in your life?
Initially, it had a negative effect on me because it was a really hard film to make. It was like going to war. It was a brutal film to work on and incredibly difficult and intellectually and psychologically and physically exhausting. So I was just completely crashed at the end of it. And then it took a while for it to sort of to have its effect on the audience and on the world. And even before that, I took this young woman at the time, who's now my wife, to it, and she saw it with her girlfriend, and they both wanted to divorce me having seen it. It was a sort of like, if you're trying to have an affair with me and that's the films we make, I don't want to have a bar of you. So,
wow.
So it's a pretty brutal film. Mad Max it's a powerful violence that you create in your own mind, and there's not a lot of violence on the screen, unlike a lot of American films which just shoot 'em up and bloods, and so it's had an up and down effect. More recently, it's been a beautiful film for me. It's been really magical. I've been interviewed by journalists and book writers and documentary makers, and it makes me feel very privileged and proud to be part of something that's special. It's something that I continue to search for, and I believe that I've come close recently on Mushy, that on that film set there was this camaraderie. There was this my grandfather went through the First World War. My father went through the Second World War. I went through Mad Max. But that camaraderie and that sort of that like we're talking about the family and the real. If you can achieve that on a film set, if you can create the energy on that film set, that energy will come out of the screen.
Okay, how do you think that energy was created on Mad Max?
Well, it's through leadership, through George and Byron. George and Byron they had a vision, and that vision was mighty powerful. And they'd gone to they've spent a lot of time building that vision. How
did they communicate it?
In communicating to the crew, the film that George Miller and Byron Kennedy wanted to make was actually part of the problem of making the film. It was why it was a nightmare to work on, because Byron kept all his cards very close to his chest. He didn't want to give away too much, and so because basically he had a very small budget and he had a very difficult job, and so the more we knew, the worse it would have been. And George was also he was a young director, and he gathered around him a team that were very experienced, well, reasonably experienced anyway. But he had a vision, and that vision was unique and different and completely outside of what any of us had all done before. So there was a lot of battles going on.
So he was engaging everybody and enrolling them in his vision.
Yeah.
Very clearly, even though on the other side there was really very little money to be able to make that vision. So the difference between what all of you shared as where you were going and what you had to deal with was what created that, the complexity of it. So how did that play out on a day-to-day basis? What made it such a difficult shoot? Was it the lack of money?
Well, no. Well, the third thing was the danger. We're working incredibly long hours. We were travelling long distances. We were driving fast cars. We were driving fast motorbikes. We're all sort of in this Mad Max world. To make it work, we all got into this sort of Mad Max world where there was this dystopian world where it was sort of like the end of the world was coming, and it was all coming to a big climax and a big explosion which was at the end of the film. And so we're all very aware of our expendability and that someone could be hurt or harmed. And in fact, Grant Page, on day 2 of the shoot, was driving into the sunrise, and a big semi-trailer pulled out in front of him, or did a U-turn in front of him, and he had to slide the bike underneath it. And we lost our lead actress. We're all on edge from then on. Grant was a highly respected and still loved great stunt performer, and so for him to take a fall as early as that on the film, we all thought, well, if because Grant was bulletproof, and then he comes out to location with his face all bashed up and with a plaster on his face and.
Yeah, and so I can understand, you're saying that you were living in that dystopian world. I can understand how hard that must have been. When you finished, how did all of you decompress?
We didn't. We didn't. And in fact, I'll completely change the story here, but it's got relevance. So in 1962, my family and I were living in Warrandyte, and our house was burnt down in the 1962 bushfires.
Okay.
And so when that happened, life went on. Life went on, and so there was no sort of debriefing or psychological or anything like that. There is now. Mad Max was made a number of years later. But it was still in that world where you don't debrief, you don't, you just get on and do what you're doing. And I just slept it off, basically. I was exhausted and...
Let's take you back to, we were talking about your career, and we were talking about you went down the production side, which is the
management side,
the project management side. Yeah. You worked on a number of features, you've worked on some television.
Yeah.
At what point did you decide to go out on your own, and how did you do that?
I see a filmmaker as creating a brand. and it's up to you to create a reputation for yourself and develop your career through that reputation. So at Swinburne, I was a brand. I was an individual, and then when I did Alvin Purple, I was an individual, but I was still freelance. But then I joined Crawford Productions, and yes, that was an employment contract, and so I was employed like a 9 to 5 sort of. But it was a job that only had a certain lifespan. I was working on Homicide. I mainly worked on Matlock Police, and that had a certain life expectancy. It was eventually going to be taken over by another television program, or the audience would get sick of it. Then I went freelance again, and I was doing TV commercials, and so I've always been basically an independent filmmaker that picks up the jobs and either does long jobs or small jobs or medium-sized jobs. Yeah.
What did you learn from doing television commercials?
I learned a great deal from working on television commercials, because they were 30 seconds, and I learnt that you could tell a great deal in 30 seconds. And in fact, you had to. It was extraordinary the amount of information that those people who owned the products were trying to tell within that 30 seconds. And so it was fascinating how much was work that went into, and how much money and time and energy went into making a 30-second commercial, let's say, or even a 15-second commercial, and whether that was a success or not in the marketplace. I see myself as a commercial filmmaker, as a commercial film producer, and so I'm in the business of making a living out of it, and so that was a very handy experience to see it from a commercial point of view. This is a commercial film. This film is made to sell product.
My experience on doing television commercials is also that there is the people who are the advertising agency have a lot of skin in the game, and they're quite a hard taskmaster. They're very exacting. So I would imagine, from your point of view, working with that industry would also have been a very interesting and challenging thing to do. That would have required, I think, some additional skills.
The advertising agency people have got a very specific, clear expectation, and so does the client who is paying in the end the money so that for their product to be promoted. And from my point of view, I sort of got out of TV commercials along the way as a filmmaker, because it's frustrating, because you are. I'll give one example. One example is on this film set, and we were selling dog food product, and I had to sort of position that food to make it look absolutely fantastic. I've also worked on lots of other commercials, like toilet paper commercials and cigarette commercials. And
one of the things that we know is that feature films can take 5 years, can take longer.
Yeah.
And you've talked about the family that gets created in that process.
Yeah.
So what is it like being part of that family, and it's a temporary thing, even if it's long term, and then walking away?
When you make a film, you engage with people, and you're creatively working with them, and so you learn a great deal about them, because you're putting them under pressure, and they're putting you under pressure, or they've got their own concerns and considerations, and so do you, and you're all working to this one goal. On a feature film, you've got pre-production, which can be 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, and then you've got the shoot, which can be 3 weeks on a really low budget, but 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever, even longer. And so during that process, you're working with them. You're typically, because you can potentially be on location, you're sort of relaxing with them. You're carousing with them. And yes, then it's sad, because when the time comes, it all wraps up and it finishes up and it's all over, and the family all just dissipates and disappears off into the distance. The joy is that you do then come back to work with them again. It can be all sorts of reasons. So just recently I produced a short little horror film, and we put a call out to, because it was a low budget proof of purpose film for a young up-and-coming director Odin Jure, who's I think he's got a lot of talent and is going to do a lot of really good things. And Andrew Jones, who I work with on Mad Max, who I was still connected to through Facebook, sort of says, "Hey John, I'd love to work on it." And I go, "Wow, okay." And I said, "Mate, I've got no money for the unit, but would be it'd be fantastic if you came along." And he said, "Oh, I'd love to work with you again." So I was really honoured, and what a delight. And Andrew was fantastic. It was just
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And it is a small industry, and I suppose one of the things that I've been thinking while we're sitting here, I've been thinking about the Clint Eastwood model, where he works with the same people as much as he can over and over again.
Yeah.
But that's not an opportunity you've really had, given that you've worked on so many different kinds of projects, I guess.
Yeah, that's the Paul Cox model as well, the Australian film director who did many films. I love to work with the family, but I also want to work with the people that are best for the film and are best for the project. There's a lot of directors of photography I'd love to work with, but I can't give the job to all of them.
No.
And I can only, and it's one can be better with a drone, and another can be better with action, and another can be better with drama. In the case of Andrew Jones, he was perfect for the unit management. So yeah.
What are the projects that you're excited about now?
So the projects that I'm really excited about at the moment are a short film. I've just completed a short film called Mushy, which is a little horror film with a young director called Odin Jure, and that's a proof of purpose film. So one of the ways of financing a film, to continue the answer of an earlier question, is you make a short film. So a young director could make a short film with a small budget, but show that they've got talent and show that they've got skill sets, and have a view of the world that is different to what we're seeing out there. That's what art is. Art for me is looking at the world, is showing something to the general public that they haven't seen before in a different way. That's in post-production at the moment.
So that proof of purpose,
Yeah.
that's like a sizzle reel, is it, for your feature?
Yeah, it's a sort of a sizzle reel. Yeah, metaphorically, it's a sizzle reel. It shows you can put that to finance the development of a script. You need a treatment. You need a synopsis, a log line, a title. You need a team around it. And if you've got a sizzle, well, it's not really a sizzle reel, because a sizzle reel is all little bits and pieces. This is just a little a vignette or a suggestive piece of moving image with audio that gives the potential investor an idea of where that film's going.
How long might that be?
They can be about 10 minutes.
Okay. So that's enough to really give a flavour of where the piece is going.
Yeah.
So do you generally do a little bit of each act? So is it like the story in short form?
What you do is you do a beginning, a middle and end, and it goes back to my suggestion that as a filmmaker, make films. The more talented and more creative people you can attach to that film, the better. And then the other aspect of it is that a 10-minute film that can then go into film festivals. So what that does is build the reputation of the filmmaker. And so by getting the film into, and in this case, horror film festivals, and you get audiences, you get in front of the audiences, which is something you really need to do, because then you learn whether people are laughing at your film or crying on your film or horrified by your film, and if that film is working. And if it does well, which we all hope it does, then people are aware of you, and the brand, Odin Jure's brand, will grow, and it will become, people will be want to connect with him and talk to him and say, what's your next film, or what are what's your idea?
And as a producer, you've then got something that you can take to the finance people and say, here is the brand, and here is the work, and here is the reaction that we've had to it.
I've got something to show and something to tell, and I've got a story. So I've not only got the story that that Odin is trying to tell, but I've also got a story that about the commercial reality of this young filmmaker or another young filmmaker. So recently I've been working with a person who I met years ago at Swinburne. We went to Swinburne Film and Television School together, Janet Dimolo, and Janet recently discovered this roll of 16mm film that her mother had collected. So I got very excited because I love all that sort of stuff. And so we got it transferred through Telecine, and we've got a digital copy for it. And lo and behold, I'm in it. And Glenys Rowe, who was heavily involved with SBS and also did greenkeeping, producer of a feature film. So there's this, quite female angst film from many years ago that came out of the blue. And so Janet and I I've just got a little post-production suite and a little bit of equipment and gear, as a filmmaker. And so we've done a soundscape for it, and we did a voiceover yesterday, and we've rewritten the story, and we'll release it eventually and probably put it out in the film festivals as this sort of bizarre little film that's sort of like 40 years old and has been remastered and re-envisaged.
What fun!
Yeah, well. Spoken word in there, but we've got no soundtrack because we couldn't afford anything like that back then. So we've got no idea. She's even involved a deaf person to see if we could read the lips, but to no avail. So we've decided to just create a new story about this angst young girl who goes to a party and anyway, you'll have to see the film when it's completed.
Everything old is new again.
Well, it's a crazy world, because exactly at the same time, a person from Warrandyte contacted me about 20 years ago. They made a film about the Presbyterian Church with my father. He designed the Presbyterian Church. And they had these two VHSs, and on the two VHSs is me as a 10-year-old sort of waving at the camera and carrying on and being a bit of a lair. So there I am at 10, and there I am at like not 18 or something.
Yeah,
it is bizarre, yeah. But it like I go, wow, great, what a.
You're working with a council, or you've been working with Wyndham Council. Can you tell me about that?
I've been working with a South Sudanese writer-director, Ez Eldon Deng, on another project, on a big project, a feature film that's in development, which involves the South Sudanese, a story that has connections to the South Sudanese people. Ez has been working for the City of Wyndham. He approached me and he said, look, I need some assistance here. The City of Wyndham want me to make a film to raise the morale of the South Sudanese community here in the City of Wyndham, because they're feeling a lot of pressure from the media and from the wider world. I was delighted. I really wanted to work with Ez, so we connected up, and I went down and met with Nicholas Bosley, who's a wonderful guy, the executive producer, and so we entered into a contract, and we've made a short film called Road Dogs, which is this film about a young South Sudanese boy who's a rap singer and having trouble finding his voice.
Sounds wonderful. That's great. Must have been really a great heart film, that one.
I, throughout my career, have continued to experiment and to sort of search for the answers that are very fleeting and very. I'd love to be able to make a film and it be completely, totally, hugely successful commercially and critically acclaimed and all that sort of stuff. Now that's not an easy thing to do, and I've seen it. I've been very fortunate in my life to have worked on Alvin Purple, which was critically bagged, but commercially hugely successful. I've also worked on Mad Max. First off, it was canned, but then everybody fell in love with it, and commercially it was a huge success. So. And I've been inspired by that. Would love to do the same thing. So, working with Ez, not to actually make a commercial film in that case, but to actually speak to the audience and to raise the morale of a particular audience. That's my role as a filmmaker, to engage, to entertain, and to educate an audience. It's a very privileged position, and if I can engage them initially and then entertain them, that's fantastic. But if I can actually just educate them a bit, and in the case of Road Dogs, it certainly, the South Sudanese community love it, and it started conversations about what was going on in the community, and it really did raise the morale, and it really did help. And it's got a long way to go. It's got a long life. That's TV commercials got a short life, short films have got a longer life, feature films got a really long life.
What makes you passionate now?
Still making movies. I still love to entertain and engage the audience. I still want to change the world for a better place. That's a big ambition.
That is a big ambition.
But you know, why not?
Well, I've had fun this afternoon, John. Thank you so much for coming along. I appreciate it.
It's a real pleasure. No, it was great too. Thank you, Leslie. Yeah.
I've been with John Hipwell. Thank you very much for watching Tête-à-Tête.